my next guest has gotten to be a friend. You know, my wife has actually never met him and his wife in person, so she wanted to be here and now can't because our kid is having tests today in school. But I'm a big fan. I'm a big believer in his administration. It was a no-brainer when he first ran for governor that this is a guy we're supporting. And I'll tell you why. Maybe he won't want me to tell the story, but he's just a normal person. I took him to a steakhouse that was a nice steakhouse. I'm thinking, Secretary of State, I should take you to a nice steakhouse. And he was not happy because he couldn't order a Budweiser at the time. It was too fancy. And I love the guy and his wife. They've gotten to be good friends. A phenomenal governor, the first governor in the nation to bring his state back out of COVID lockdown. He doesn't get enough credit for that. And I tell people now all the time, if you want to see the progress and growth in his state, don't hang out in Atlanta where, yes, there are cranes everywhere. Drive I-16, the worst interstate in America. It should be the Autobahn. For those of you not from Georgia, this thing is flat and straight and 70 miles an hour, and it could be 100 or 200 miles an hour to get us through it. But when you go down now, my gosh, the amount of construction in rural Georgia on both sides of this interstate headed from Macon to Savannah in places that haven't seen industry like this. It's thriving, it's growing. My city is Macon in the middle of the state, and we have this never-ending road construction project that started when I was on city council a decade ago. And it hasn't stopped yet because they're expecting so much industry between Macon and Savannah where there's literally nothing right now. They have to expand the interstate to prepare for it, and it won't stop being built. My kid will be like an old woman with grandkids before they finish this thing. But it's because of the amazing economic progress that has been sparked by the present governor of the state of Georgia, my friend Brian Kemp.
Thank you.
How are you?
You said that.
Thank you. Let me just start with this part because we took the kids to Hilton Head a while back. The amount of construction between Macon and Savannah is, I hadn't been down there in a while. You get down towards Bryan County now and the big facility they're building for Hyundai. I mean, it's just places that haven't had economic industry. Wilkinson County has his new projects, which is so rural. I mean, it really is amazing.
You were doing such a good job of that intro. I thought about not coming out, let you just keep talking about my record. But thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here and host with you. And it is incredible. And it's not just happening on I-16 in rural Georgia. I mean, we have an incredible amount of projects going on in Southwest Georgia, which if you really look at the map and a lot of the counties that are there, some of those are the most poorest counties in the country, not just in the state, but in the country. And we've got great opportunity going in down there. I was talking with a car dealer out of Chattanooga last night, and he was talking about how really Chattanooga, and they say it's like North Georgia now there, because we're having so much growth in Northwest Georgia, just with great manufacturing jobs that are paying well above the existing county wage. And it's really giving people wealth and opportunity, which, as you know, they need in today's world of fighting Joe Biden's 40-year high inflation.
True. All right, I got to completely on a random tangent because I'm looking at your boots. You know, when my mother-in-law was here a couple of years ago and you were here, she said she liked you because your boots had scuffs. They were authentic.
Well, these definitely have scuffs on them. Thankfully, we had a groundbreaking yesterday up in Gainesville, which again, outside kind of the metro Atlanta area for Kubota Tractor. They're going to be building all their front-end loaders at that new facility. It's like the number of employees that they've increased since they came here in like 1970 something is 8,900%. They employ over 3,000 Georgians now. They started with 40 or 50. They've done multiple expansions up there, and this is another $100 million plus project, several hundred jobs up in Gainesville and Hall County. And so I hadn't really had time to get my boots back in good order since we did that yesterday.
Now look, this reminds me, Rick Perry one time told me that you can always judge a man by his boots. If they look like they hadn't been worn in, you know they're not authentic.
Well, I called a lot of, you remember when I went to Davos, I called a lot of flack from people on the right because they thought I was going to get corrupted by George Soros or Al Gore or John Kerry or something. And I told people, after all I've been through and as strong stances I've taken for conservative causes, I don't think I'm going to get corrupted by any of those people. And so the greatest first lady in the country who's here today, Marty Kemp right there, we go to Davos, it's snow and it's wet, it's icy, and they're like, you cannot wear those cowboy boots, like it's slick, you're going to fall. I said, no, I have got to wear these cowboy boots. And thankfully the first article was written when I was on the stage with Joe Manchin, Senator Chris Coons, and Christine Sinema, where I was criticizing the so-called Inflation Reduction Act and their do-nothing immigration policies at the southern border and a lot of other things. In the minute and 38 seconds that I got to talk on the panel with those federal politicians, at a 45-minute panel, I only got to talk for a minute and 38 seconds. I know that doesn't surprise y'all. Nothing against my friends that are federal politicians, but you know how they are. But the first article written after that was, that I was wearing my cowboy boots in Davos. So I thought that was, really told the story in a lot of ways.
It did. All right. I have said I'm not going to talk a lot about this because I think I'm doing a disservice to the presidential candidates, but you are the governor of the state. We're in the county where the state prosecutor has decided to indict the former president. And I figure being the governor of the state, I should probably get your take on that.
I can't really comment on the indictment. If you remember kind of through the process, during the whole 2020 election, there was a lot of things said, a lot of things done. At the end of the day, I followed the law and the Constitution. I was subpoenaed for the special grand jury, so, I'm sure I will be a witness in whatever goes forward, so I really can't say much about the indictment. But regardless of what you think about the indictment, when I came out, I guess it was 2 days ago now, and tweeted the election wasn't stolen here and that we need to stay focused on the future. One thing is certain about these indictments, in my mind, in my opinion, this trial, despite what dates anybody's asking for or anything else, it is not going to happen before the election. And the Democrats want us to be focused on things like this, so we're not focused on Joe Biden's record. And I brought my little prop today. So it's a number 2 yellow pencil with an eraser. And if you do not win, you do not get to hold the pencil. And right now, Biden's holding the pencil. They're holding the pencil for the regulatory environment, whether it's at the Federal Trade Commission, at EPA, at the Justice Department, at the FBI, and they are pencil whipping the American people right now. And we have to stay focused on winning the pencil back, because then we can use the eraser to get rid of all the bad things. But really, you get to put the eraser to all the bad things that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democrats have done in Washington, D.C., and really get back to focusing on things that we know that we can change so very quickly with the right person in the White House, securing the border, restoring our military to where it needs to be, not picking winners and losers with the Inflation Reduction Act, getting our federal spending under control, just all these, dealing with 40-year high inflation, all these things that just frustrate people. It's insanity that we're having to deal with this. It should be such an easy path for us to win the White House back. But if we are looking in the rearview mirror, and this is what my message has been to every candidate in the race, including former President Trump, and I first said this in Nashville at the RNC donor retreat, is we have to be focused on the future, not something that happened 3 years ago. We don't need to be focusing on stupid things that aren't going to happen before this election. We can deal with that later, after we win. We have to tell people what we are for. And then we have to have a candidate that can win the election, because if we don't win, we don't get to govern, and we don't get the pencil. I mean, it's that simple to me.
Amen to that. So you got the pencil in the state of Georgia, and And I try to explain to people, particularly in light of the calls here, well, you should just pardon the former president, and explain to people our Constitution doesn't work that way in the state. Every Constitution's differently. Yeah. One of the things that you get to do as governor is it strikes me as, while you're constrained in so many areas under the state constitution, economically you got a lot of power to woo businesses and bring businesses into the state, but also to try to grow the existing businesses in the state, which I've always, and I've told you this privately, I've admired your recognition that in the past we had a lot of governors luring in massive corporations at the expense of existing business in the state. And you really have done a really good job of looking at our industries that are already here and what can we do to grow them, and putting your administration to that.
Well, that was really what was so great about the Kubota ribbon cutting, or the groundbreaking we did yesterday, or 2 days ago, I guess it was, is that was an existing business. And they like the environment here so much, they just decided to expand here versus, looking at other places, or moving, or going to other states, or doing it overseas. And that's, a vast majority of our projects last year. We had despite the headwinds that we have economically right now, we had another record year in Georgia last year. The State Department of Economic Development was involved in 426 projects last year. So, I don't know how many weekdays there are in a work week in a year, but you think about 365 days in a year, we announced 426 projects. So that's, over one a day, which is incredible. And they were going all over the country. All over the state. And a lot of them were existing businesses. And look, this is what you're seeing with people that win the election, like the Republican governors have in the South. We've been able to govern. We're competing against each other. Several weeks ago, it was announced that the GDP in the South had outpaced the GDP in the Northeast for the first time ever. There is a reason for that. It's because we're governing, because we have good business policies, because people want to move here where they can, experience liberty and freedom, and they have political leaders and governors and legislators that are fighting for their kids to be in the classroom when you have other states that are locking them down and keeping them out during COVID a year longer than us, not having them indoctrinated when they're in the classroom, doing something about crime, doing something about gangs. And no one's done more in the country at the state level working with our legislators than Marty Kemp in ending human trafficking in our state and helping the victims. All those kind of things we're able to do because we won, because we have majorities, and because we can govern.
I want to actually ask you about the First Lady and human trafficking, because it's one of those stories that increasingly now, as people on our side focus on it, people on the other side, well, it's not really a big issue. Yet when I was on city council in Macon, we would raid businesses in Macon and find clearly the conditions of women who were trafficked. We've had these raids in the metro Atlanta area where kids, some of whom had been kidnapped in this country, some brought into this country, had been involved in, forced into human trafficking. Congressman Chip Roy from Texas tells me just a couple of months ago on the border, they pulled over a truck and it was an American working for the cartels smuggling people over who thought they were coming here to be housekeepers, and they were being diverted into sex trafficking. It continues to be this massive issue. The First Lady has raised awareness in the state. You've been fighting for it, and yet there does seem to be this level of dismissive. But I've noticed you've been able to build a pretty good bipartisan coalition on this.
Yeah, we've had passed 8 pieces of legislation now, and look, the First Lady will browbeat the legislators to make sure that they're voting.
That's what I've heard.
There's been 7 of them passed unanimously with bipartisan support. There was the last bill, we had 1 person that voted against our human trafficking bill, and that person has heard from the First Lady and still continues to hear from him. And I'm sure we'll forever be hearing from her. But I think this is something that's important for conservatives, is something that's important for Republicans, and I think it's something important for our state. We have never run from our values in the state of Georgia. We are a state that values life. I fully understand people have broad differences of opinion when it comes to Roe v. Wade, the abortion debate, Our heartbeat bill that we passed back in 2019 and tried to get canceled then, probably the first part of the canceled movement, and we didn't waver. But regardless of where people are on that, we have also done other things to value life, like the fight against human trafficking, but not just going after the perpetrators, but helping the victims. I mean, it is heartbreaking what these people have been through in their lives. It is such a hard issue. It is, as Marty says, it is not easy to talk about. She told me yesterday that a survivor of 6 years that's been working to help other survivors overdosed yesterday. Self-inflicted overdose. After 6 years of giving back and helping. I mean, it shows you how evil and hard this crime is. But also in the state of Georgia, we're very proud, and you never hear the other side talk about this. We have done adoption reform. We have done foster care reform. We've been focused on supporting elderly. We've been going after gangs and human trafficking and drug cartels because people are dying every single day, and every governor in the country is dealing with the fentanyl that's coming across our southern border because of the policies of the Joe Biden administration. So those are the values that we have in Georgia that we have continued to fight for, and I just want to also thank, my partners in the General Assembly and the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor and all the others that have supported these policies and stood strong when we've been canceled.
Well, I appreciate both of you on this fight. It's one we can't do enough on. One of the other fights we've got in the state right now is the school issue, and we've got the opportunity scholarship in the states, but it really came to a head for me this past year when we now have a black female Democrat in the state house who's now a Republican because of the school choice issue, the level of antagonism actually from her own side on that issue that she stood up to fight for this actually kind of surprised me more than I expected it to, given it was white suburban Democrats who were mad at a black female Democrat from Atlanta for wanting better education for kids.
Well, it is frustrating. I think people really saw that during COVID as to who was fighting for our children in this state. And I mean, if you look at what happened in Georgia, we were one of the first states to get kids back in the classroom. I've been a staunch local control governor, which is really hard to do a lot of times. We have 180 school districts in our state in the public system, and we probably had 95% of those that were open, that went back as early as anybody in the country, that fought through all the things. Our daughter was a first grade teacher in public school at that time, and we had an incredible year, and I am so thankful that we did that. I mean, we had a daughter that didn't have the normal end of her junior year of high school. We saw her friends not get to do spring sports, not get to graduate. It was heartbreaking for parents, and even worse for these kids. But then in the aftermath of that, we saw pandemic politics at its height when we had Democratic activist school boards, but mostly in metro cities, that would not get our kids back in the classroom because of COVID, even when the data and the science said that they should. And I think that really is what led to the furthering of school choice last year, the legislation that didn't pass the House. It got through the Senate. I was very supportive of that. It was targeted at failing schools, which I think is an absolutely really good policy. But quite honestly, we have some rural Republicans that didn't support the legislation because they have good school districts. The school districts are some of the largest employers in their legislative districts. So I think it's up to all of us to continue to educate people. Like, we are not trying to target, bad or good K through 12 schools. We're trying to help, bad K through 12 schools in the local communities. And even when you have some that don't score that well, most people in those rural communities, they still like that school. They're just dealing with a lot of challenging students and other things that you can work through. But we need to give people that are trapped in failing schools in other parts of the state, in my opinion, a choice and an opportunity to escape those schools. And we'll be working hard on that issue again next year in the state of Georgia.
I asked the crowd for questions. And I've waited closer towards the end of our conversation to bring this up because, well, I know that you could probably spend the next hour on this, but I've been asked to ask you what you think about the start of college football season and how UGA is going to line up.
Oh man, this is great. Hey, well, go Dogs. I mean, look, I'm excited about the season, especially for the University of Georgia. Marty and my alma mater, she cheered one year, Georgia football. And I think they're going to have another great year. They're loaded. You know, we got to figure out who the quarterback's going to be, but they've really got 3 great choices, and they have so many weapons on offense around them. They don't have to try to do too much. So I feel really good. Georgia's schedule's a little bit soft this year, but still, that being said, when you're playing in the SEC, you remember last year's Missouri game, they almost beat us out there, and anybody can lose in the SEC on any Saturday. So I'm looking for good things. I think they got a chance to three-peat if they can stay healthy, but they're also going to have a lot of people gunning for them. It's kind of like, you know, when you're the incumbent, everybody's trying to take you down, so they got a lot of other distractions that have been going on, so they have to stay really focused. It kind of reminds me of the presidential race. We do not need to get distracted. We need to stay focused on beating Joe Biden in 2024. And I don't want to look ahead and get distracted in the next season, but when we have the playoff expand, Georgia's got a really tough year, but if we can somehow three-peat this year, you know, my prediction when we announced that Georgia and the city of Atlanta was going to be the first city to have a repeat for the college football playoff national championship game at Mercedes-Benz, that would be when Georgia wins their 4th consecutive national championship. Of course, when I said that, I didn't realize that we were going to have to play Alabama and Texas on the road. So we'll see how that goes, but we got to get through this year first. But it's going to be another great year.
Speaking of college football championships, aren't we owed an all-star game from baseball?
Yeah. Well, you know, thankfully the baseball gods, if you will, shined on us when the Braves won the World Series the same year Major League Baseball canceled the All-Star game because we simply did an Elections Integrity Act that made it even easier to vote in our state. Also made sure that we don't cheat in the state of Georgia, and we had record turnout in our primary, robust voting in the general election, and post-election surveys. Democrats and Republicans loved the process in Georgia. Hardly anybody complained about it. We didn't have long lines. Nobody needed food and water when they were in line, even though they could get it if they wanted it, because they weren't standing in line that long because of the things that the General Assembly and I did. And we were vindicated from really what Major League Baseball and what other corporations were doing, really because they got pressured to do so. And I think that's why it's so important for us to have political leaders that will stand up and stand in the gap. And we were one of the first states to have to deal with that when we passed the heartbeat bill when Hollywood was trying to cancel us. And we also were one of the first states to have to do that when Major League Baseball pulled the All-Star game. And we never wavered. We stood by our convictions and what we did because we knew we had a good bill that we're not going to keep people from voting, but it also was going to make sure it was secure and have people have confidence on both sides, which I think is important. It's important for Republicans to be confident in the process, but it's also important for the Democrats and anybody else to be important in the process. And for people that are still out there complaining, look, you can believe whatever you want about the 2020 election. That is your right. I understand that. I have no problem with that. But the thing is, that was 3 years ago. And if you're still mad about that, quit complaining about that. Sign up to be a poll worker, be a poll watcher, get involved in the process, door knock, phone call. Do something that will help us win in 2024. Complaining is not going to help us win.
Amen. I want to go back to the college issue, but not football. The Wall Street Journal did a story the other day, and it blew my mind. I talked about this on radio. They said University of Kentucky spent $800,000 a day for 10 years to upgrade their facilities, and the cost of tuition there has gone up. And meanwhile here, you're working to re-expand the Hope Scholarship so kids in the state don't have to be overwhelmed with the burden of student loans. We've got amazing facilities in the state, junior colleges, we've got all the state colleges, universities, UGA and Georgia Tech, harder and harder to get into. I mean, what do you see on the horizon for access to college education for students?
Well, I think that's one of our keys to being the #1 state in the country for business, while we've had 3 record years in a row when it comes to economic development, investment coming to our state, or new businesses expanding, job creation, and other things. 2 years ago, we worked a deal with the university system, which is our colleges and universities in the state, to do away with the institutional fee that really was between $800 and $1,000 a year, depending on what school you were. We back-funded some budget cuts that they had years ago. In exchange, they did away with the fee. So last year, we made it, somewhere between $500 and $1,000 a year cheaper for families and kids to go to our university system in the state of Georgia, while we've been holding tuition flat for the last several years for the most part. This year, we expanded the Hope Scholarship to pay 100% of our students' tuition, where we had, if you had a 3.7 grade point average, you got full tuition through the Hope Scholarship. If you had 3 or better, you got a portion of that paid. It used to be all 100%, so with the General Assembly support, we went back to 100% last year. So again, that's saving families, $500 to $1,000, I think it is. So actually, cost for most of our families in the state has either remained flat or gone down in the state of Georgia, even in these inflationary environments. Now, there's definitely pressures on the system right now that we're going to have to address and deal with. But I'm very excited about what we have going on, and not only our university system, but this is also true in our technical college system too. So if you want to be, a welder, learn the heating and air trade, truck driving, a lot of other skills that we need out there, medical assistants, different things of that nature, we have really either low or no cost tuition. Same thing, we have that in law enforcement. Encourage people to get into law enforcement so we can have more law enforcement officers to help us with violent crime and keeping our community safe. So that's been a big help. We've had to spend a lot of money to do that at the state level, but for us it's worth it because we're producing the workforce that we need, which is one reason a lot of the companies are coming to our state.
So we've been talking about the future. Can I ask you, your term limited, 8 years governor. So are you thinking anything about the future or just the next legislative cycle?
No, I'm thinking about the future. And to me, the future is 2024, not 2026. I hope y'all are getting my message today that we need to stay focused on 2024, on beating Joe Biden, on having a Republican in the White House so we can get the old pencil back. So that's what we got to stay focused on. We'll worry about all that other stuff later.
All right. Listen, and just so the crowd understands, we could not have pulled off this conference but for Governor Kemp and his PAC stepping up to help us. They were really generous, and I owe you a lot of public things for helping us do that. You've been a good friend to me, and I can't thank you enough for your administration. You are the first Republican governor of the state who's actually been a Republican, didn't switch party. You've always been principally Republican, and I think it shows in your policies.
Well, it's our honor to sponsor with you. You've been the same kind of friend to me, Eric, and I appreciate that. Even when I was Secretary of State, I was going to red state events out in New Orleans, I think it was, and had been to a lot of the gathering events, and it's I've also been a believer when I did the SEC primary when I was Secretary of State, trying to get presidential candidates to come to the state of Georgia and talk to our people and have our citizens here be part of the presidential process. I didn't know, a decade later that we would be ground zero. But the road to the White House is running through Georgia, y'all. If we don't win this state, we are not winning the White House, and I thought it was important to be able to get our presidential candidates to Georgia to let them talk to our people and get exposure here. Because the mainstream media, for the most part, is not telling the story of all the good things that our candidates are doing out there. And I know that Erick will pull that out of them, and the format that you have is a good way to do that.